Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's lovely to see so many of you already through the doors, and as more are coming in, please feel free to say hello. If you haven't used Livestorm before, you will find to the right a little chat window. I think Maria has already said hello, so please feel free to use that and let us know who you are and where you're joining from. So this is the fifth webinar in our higher education series for early 2022, our fifth and final. And we're coming to one of our favorite topics, one of our most popular topics on credentials, whether you call them new credentials or micro-credentials or alternative credentials. We are very pleased to be here, and you'll notice we have a special guest, Aaron McKenna, who's joining us from the University College Dublin Professional Academy. So those of you who are regulars at some of these webinars, this is a slight variation on what we might normally do with you. Aaron's going to be the centerpiece of our webinar today, and we'll be hearing from Aaron about a real working and successful example of alternative credentials and get the chance to hear a little bit more about kind of behind the scenes in a case study, what happens behind the shiny successful doors, what makes it happen, and what can we all learn from that process. So we're really excited to be here with you all today. Thank you for joining us, whether it's late or early or sensibly in an afternoon for you. So here's who we're joined by. You'll also have seen in the bottom there, Maria Spies, our co-CEO. Maria will be taking us through some of the market background on micro-credentials and alternative credentials too. Anybody who is new to HolonIQ, just a very brief introduction. We are the world's leading platform for impact intelligence, now working across education, health, and climate. So some really important sectors where change is just happening all the time. And so we're working with governments, with NGOs, universities, firms, tech, investors in 26 countries. Is that all? It must be more. To power the decisions that are really informing what people are doing and saying in these sectors. So particularly lots in academia, some of our favorite companies around the world. And there's your UCD logo right in the middle there, Aaron. So as I said, this is the final of 5 webinars. We've been on a bit of a journey from digital transformation, looking at where we are now and doing a comparison with some results from a survey we ran last year. We've been through international education and a massive sizing of that market and looking at how it's shaping up after 2 incredibly turbulent years. Patrick came in and we looked at the future of OPMs and the partnership market. A couple of weeks ago, we traveled virtually to Latin America and we welcomed Elena from the Inter-American Development Bank to do a deep dive into higher ed digital transformation in Latin America. And here we are today with Dublin and Aaron on new credentials. So it's been a wonderful tour of the world. And our agenda for today in particular. So in a moment, I'm going to pass across to Maria to talk a bit more about the context and some of the really important drivers behind the credentialing space and look at some of the trends that we're seeing even within the last year since we last shared updates on this. And then we'll briefly connect to the Higher Education Digital Capability Framework. Some of you may be very familiar with this. Some of you may be seeing it for the first time. And then look at the case study with Aaron, some scenarios for micro-credentials. There are still lots of directions micro-credentials could be heading in. And one of the most useful things is looking at how that could go in a few different scenarios. And then we'll wrap and share some next steps and where you can find us next. So Maria, I'll hand the reins over to you.
Thanks, Lucy. Hi, everyone. It's great to see people from all over the world. Everyone's interested in micro-credentials, and for good reason. Let's jump into what's happening in the context that's driving and shaping some of where micro-credentials might head. So firstly, just zooming right out here, this is our sizing of the education market globally. This is everything. And so you can see there from 2019 through to 2025, we sized the global education market at $7.8 trillion. We resized post-COVID to $7.3 trillion. So that's a downgrade in sizing. I mean, that's not a bad thing necessarily, right? But one of the key reasons that we downsized the size of the market is because of higher education tuition deflation, which we expect, number one, and number two, faster, cheaper, credible alternatives. And so the less people are spending on education, the smaller the market. There might be more people studying or learning, but the the price they're paying is less. And so this is one of the key drivers really for our sizing of the market, as well as digitization generally drives a lower cost base. And so just the importance of digital and the importance of credible alternatives to traditional education, particularly post-secondary, is driving some of that market size. What's happening in higher education? Well, there are strategic shifts. None of these are brand new, but things move through time, and new credentials, shorter, more flexible from a range of providers, are becoming more and more valued by learners and by employers. It's a tight labour market everywhere in the world, and people need to upskill and fast. And so new credentials are emerging, or have emerged for quite some time, as one of those strategic shifts. And also related, of course, is education work nexus. The relationship between learning and work has never been closer. Higher education is feeling that pinch, as well as, taking steps. And we'll hear from Aaron later about an example of that. Borderless competition means that it's not universities necessarily competing with universities anymore, but universities competing with a whole host of other providers in a whole range of different countries as well. So definitely borderless competition in terms of sector and in terms of geography. And finally, another strategic shift impacting higher education is omni-channel learning, where traditional institutions are focused on and working through how to deliver online, blended, and on campus all at the same time, even with the same student in the same semester. And so that's one of those strategic shifts that's occurring right now, particularly, of course, because of COVID. Moving forward just to the size of the post-secondary market, it's big, but look at the chart here, sort of says it all. Still, the post-secondary, that's formal education market, is a $2.2 trillion market. It's big. Compared with online degrees, this is a pre-COVID sizing, $36 billion, and alternative credentials, $10 billion. And so the size is still small, but whereas post-secondary education is growing, with such a big market, growing relatively slowly, alternative credentials and online degrees are growing quite rapidly. And so we're going to, as we keep going through time and resizing, we're going to see some changes there. Moving forward to micro and alternative credentials, of course, everyone probably on this call is pretty expert in these things, but when you can compare micro credentials or alternative credentials to traditional, what you see is an unbundling essentially of the component parts of associate degrees or bachelor's degrees or master's degrees or other more traditional bundled programs of learning that operate in formal sectors through to their component parts. Now, here is, what we're seeing here is examples of other non-traditional providers, you might say, of education, but that's not to say that universities themselves are not involved in this. Of course they are, but the point of this is micro-credentials, alternative credentials come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and delivered by all sorts of different providers. And one of the issues, of course, is the definitions of these things. Until you define something, it's hard to A, regulate it, B, fund it, and C, make sure things are of equal value in the market. And so the world is still working through that. Micro-credentials are not all the same. So in that $10 billion micro and alternative credential market, there are different types. So we're looking at, something quite popular, the sort of boot camp, short course tech training is one part of it. Online non-degree certificates and post-secondary micro-credentials delivered by universities is another. Professional certifications becoming more important, been around for a long time in traditional professions, but still growing. And then there's a huge tail of online courses and badges from, half an hour through to 50 hours or something. And that is a very, very fragmented market. But of course, what we do see, of course, is platforms moving forward to try to harness the scale of that. And so key point here is micro-credentials is not one thing, but it's still quite fragmented, but there are definite component parts. And again, here's sort of some examples as you go through from short courses, 1 to 10 hours, boot camps, professional certificates, etc., etc. So really there's a whole spectrum. And as you can see in the bottom part of that slide, lots of different providers as well. Micro-credentials is important and it's growing in importance. will traditional models of education be able to cater for what the workforce needs essentially going forward, especially given changing labour markets? Micro-credential landscape is very big, it's complex, and it's also fragmented. But however, traditionally a lack of digital solutions for validation, recognition, storage, etc., does remain a barrier, but I want to talk about how that's changing. There aren't any 100% agreed standards for micro-credentials globally, like, for example, degree programs, but this is changing, and governments are making a difference and starting to build these things into qualifications frameworks, which will be a game changer, not only for traditional providers of education, but also for new potential new providers. And so what I call, what this point I call infrastructure for micro-credentials. It is building. So there is absolute demand for more granular cross-sector and cross-border recognition of knowledge and skills. This is not just in one country anymore, but really across countries, across regions, especially because of labour market movements, which is, digitally is growing. And so what we're seeing is examples such as, for example, in the USA, the Learning Credential Network. It's the US Department of Commerce American Workforce Policy Advisory Board, and this is a grouping of different elements, and they are developing a nationwide pilot to translate all education and training and work experience into a record of transferable skills. And so how will that be managed? Well, obviously blockchain technology. The American Council on Education has just finished a big blockchain challenge, and this is supporting institutions, organisations, workplaces to reorient the education and employment ecosystem around individuals. So the concept of ownership to individuals is one thing, and invited teams to do that. Have a look at that website and the results of that. Really interesting. It gives you a clue as to where things are heading. But not only in the US, of course, in the EU, has got a whole European approach to micro-credentials. They have absolute plans to apply a common EU definition to micro-credentials, build standards and key principles for the design and issuing and portability of micro-credentials. And they want to do this by 2025. And so this is not something at the edges anymore. And so, something to watch out for. Finally, the World Employment Confederation, the largest staffing firms, they're also partnering up to do some standardization. And a really great example is Singapore My Skills. And so this is, where every Singaporean from ages of 25 to 60 gets a $500 credit to use in their My Skills future, and they can undertake short courses, long courses, accredited, through the government for upskilling. And so this is a national platform. We're going to see more of that. I'd like to know from you, though, do you think micro-credentials will be integrated into most university offerings? There's a lot of people here are from the formal education sector. When will micro-credentials become integrated into most university offerings? This is a strategic question because it may be never, in your opinion. Some people just separate these things, but I'd like to understand. So let's open that poll. If you go to the polls on the right-hand side there and submit your vote, you will be able to see the results. And so micro-credentials will become integrated into most university offerings like soon, in the next 1 to 2 years, by 2025, a couple of years out, by 2030, or really never. These things are different. I can see the voting. 50% are saying by 2030. So that's still, well, what are we, 2022? 8 years away. So things are building. 45%, nearly half, are saying by 2030. 25%, a quarter, is saying by 2025. And then, a good 20% is saying in the next 1 or 2 years. So depending on where you sit in that. So most people say, we're talking about 75%, are saying that micro-credentials and universities will become serious about micro-credentials and just embed them into their offerings, at least in the next 3 years, essentially. So that's a super interesting comment by the audience, here today. Let me jump through and hand over to Lucy for the next part to talk about the framework and how that fits in.
Thank you, Maria. And I was just looking at, we asked not quite the same question, but a similar question in our session last year. And we have more people this year saying something's going to happen, or that status we're going to be moving towards in the next 1 to 2 years. But actually, generally, people's answers are a little bit more spread across the options. So Interesting. Okay, so just briefly before I hand over to Aaron, as those of you who've been to these before will know, a lot of our higher ed thinking is really grounded in the Higher Education Digital Capability Framework. This version is nearly 2 years old and probably due for a refresh actually already. But for those of you who haven't seen it, this is following the learner life cycle. So it's putting an institutional lens on digital capabilities rather than, say, a technical lens or some of those other approaches that we can have to digital capability. And it runs from left to right, from demand and discovery, which includes things like product strategy, marketing processes, student recruitment. This is the area that we're going to hear about from Aaron at the moment, through to learning design, curriculum design, subject matter expertise and teaching, over into the kind of the campus space, whether virtually or face-to-face, and looking at learner experience and digital capabilities around the social side and the learning side and the accreditation side. And then work and lifelong learning, and capturing some of those capabilities around work integrated learning, career planning and placement, and so on. So this has been our framework. And then each time we tackle a big topic, we try to have a look at which aspects of the framework are particularly relevant here. And I think Aaron's going to touch on how you think about applying frameworks like this when you're in strategic sessions and you're looking at something that's new for you. So one way to start is, for example, kind of graying out the boxes that may not be relevant to this conversation and leaving colored the ones that you think you need to talk about, or the ones that are strengths for you, or that kind of thing. So for micro-credentials, for example, if you kind of step back and squint, you'll see a lot of pink colored in. A lot of the capabilities around micro-credentials have been focusing on product strategy, what it means for you, for example, as a university, to have this new kind of parallel or integrated product. Also learning design, you'll notice the subject matter expertise vertical is kind of colored all the way through, and that's reflecting a little bit some of the nature of what's being taught in micro-credentials and what's being learned. Some very niche, very specialist areas, for example, where expertise may not traditionally have been in the university until this point. Learner experience is still a part of it, but it's a different lens on it to the university experience in other areas. And then work and lifelong learning, you'll see towards the edge of the framework, those capabilities that are about industry and business engagement, alumni and continuing education really come into focus in micro-credentials. So it's much better to hear about these things in practice. Before we do that, we will ask you to take part in one more poll, because this was one of our most interesting questions last year. Thinking about you and your institution, or if you're not in an institution, one that you know well, how would you describe the current status of micro-credential adoption where you are? Are you mature? Are you emerging? Is it non-existent? Or do you actually not know? Interesting. Okay, straight up there, emerging, getting close to 80%, 75%, which is bigger than last year, I can tell you. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so there's some stuff happening. I'd love to hear all the stories of what emerging means and what's actually happening in those spaces. But I think it's better that we hear from Aaron right now. So Aaron, I will hand over the controls to you.
Thank you.
And then, yeah, welcome.
And great to be here, and thanks for the introduction and the great market overview. And I see some great comments about the state of the alternative and micro-credentialing market, and it is one that is maybe vexing a lot of higher education institutions, and it's one that we sort of looked at this going back 2.5 years ago now at University College Dublin. So we're Ireland's largest university, about 30,000 students enrolled, and we kind of looked at this and said, you know what, we know there's a market here, right? The strong and growing demand for upskilling, reskilling, micro-credentials. How would we meet that as a traditional higher education institute? How do we build a successful business in this space? And to be honest with you, I could talk for hours on it. This is a case study you can download from HolonIQ. But let me try and give you a few key insights from our side. So from our research, we found there's a real cut to the chase chase demand from learners in this segment, right? So what they want is applicable skills, they want them fast, and they want them delivered in a digestible format that works for them. A lot of stuff about frameworks and should it be for credit and not for credit and so on doesn't bother them the way it bothers us as higher education institutions. In fact, 2/3 of the people we've surveyed who've taken a course like this in the past either took a course that wasn't credit rated or, more worryingly, didn't know if it was credit rated. So these folks are looking for that kind of cut to the chase learning. And universities have the gold standard trust mark to take a significant market share here. I genuinely believe that. But we're not always great at adapting to new markets and methods. So here at UCD, we created an academy from the ground up. We built it ourselves. We didn't partner with an OPM or anything like that. We spoke to some OPMs who kind of said, look, smaller credentials, we don't make money on them. We need people to be stacking. We need them to be getting into degrees. And we said, okay, well, we disagree with that. But we said, look, we're going to build a unit, give it, make it independent, but give it rigorous academic oversight from our partner schools and colleges. Our courses do overlap on subject with our existing offerings. So one of the big questions is, are micro-credentials going to eat my lunch? But actually, fundamentally, the student who's going to take a $20,000 course is very different to the student who's going to take a $2,000 course. And we find that over 90% of the people who consider taking a course with us weren't considering taking any form of higher education. Other than that, when they came to us, interestingly, having completed a course with us, 42% cite themselves being more likely to consider taking a higher level postgraduate study. And you bet we're actioning that. So we kind of sat down and took a customer first approach to this, right? We said, who are these students? How are they different to the core university student? What do they need that's different? And how can we service that? And day one, we sat down, we mapped our customer journey. I think there's an image in the Q&A slide of literally the first whiteboard we did. And we said, what is this journey? And then we used a framework, not dissimilar to Holon's framework, and said, what are the things we would need to fill in order to meet this need, in order to attract, retain, and then ultimately service these different types of customers. And one key insight I want to offer all of you is that we've learned over the last 2 years, 2 and a bit years, that we compete against time. We're really, really good at getting people onto a website, getting them interested in a course, getting them in touch with an education advisor, using a good CRM, and so on and so forth. But if we had all that and we didn't know about this time objection, we would have no success. And really what it is that the people who enroll with us and don't enroll with us cite time as their biggest barrier and their biggest objection and their biggest pain point that we deal with. You ask me, why are we successful? It's because we deliver our courses. When we deliver them live, we deliver them at 6:30 p.m. in the evening, instead of trying to get people in on a Monday to take a day off work to do the course. We're really practical about that sort of thing. But actually, I speak to a lot of universities who are kind of emerging into this space, and they're trying to wedge this type of teaching into their existing timetable. So I was speaking to a peer university here in Ireland. They're rolling out some micro-credentials, and what they're trying to do is get people to take a course on a Monday and a Tuesday over 2 successive weeks. That's not practical for most people. We sell 5 units part-time in the evening for every 1 unit we sell in a boot camp where people come in full-time. And some other people are saying, well, look, we want to do this on demand. So we'll do micro-credentials, but we'll create on-demand offerings. But actually, we find only less than 1 in 3 of our customers want an on-demand offering. So it's a huge segment of the market that we're missing out on. So probably what we've been really successful at is taking a customer-first approach, building our processes to suit this different type of student, this different type of learner, and indeed corporates. About half of them are sponsored by their employers in many cases, and really go to where they are. And I have to say, universities are not naturally great at that. Private training providers are better at it, but we have the better brand. Our brand is more trusted. We can deliver a trust mark and a quality mark into their CVs when they complete an assessment with us, and that's our market advantage. And we've worked really well to activate that. So impact, we launched this February 2020, we took in our first students. This case study was released in December, just gone. We had 10,000 students. We're at the end of March, we're approaching 14,000 enrollments. So that's how quickly we're growing. For context, our courses are typically like 36 hours of learning. You say if you're learn them part-time, 3 hours in the evening over 12 weeks. We have a labour force of about 2.4 million people in Ireland, so we're just getting started in terms of our journey, and we've created new strategic value for our university. So there's income. We were profitable in our first full financial year of trading, and that's growing, and we're also creating amazing connections into our university. We're bringing people into the university who just weren't near it before. Like I was speaking to the CTO of a tech unicorn, a domestically grown one here in Ireland, and we started upskilling their workforce using micro-credentials. They love it. He's now down in our computer science school, and he's helping them to build their next generation of programs for undergraduates, so he can get better graduates for the tech sector in Ireland in years ahead. What's the value of that in 10 years' time? I don't know, but it's probably pretty meaningful. And I think that this is a really kind of, let's say, a short case study, and we're going to do some Q&A on it in a second, but we're really interested to talk to other education institutions that are looking at and thinking about this space. We could be talking about how you do credentialing or not, what's important to the learner, how you build this, but we're really keen, and I love coming to sessions like this, being able to talk through Holon to a great audience like this, but also if people want to reach out, really keen to kind of chat further about the sort of journey that you might be on, and the sorts of things we can do to try and help you on that as we go. But short and sweet, we've become a leader by doing by thinking about the customer first and not our institution first, and sort of flipping the model a little bit, and we've had a lot of success in a relatively short period of time doing that.
Wonderful, thank you. And here is the photo that you shared from your very first day.
If you want to build a multi-million-dollar business in 2 years, start with a whiteboard and put 6 points on it. That's where the business started, day one. Literally, what's the student journey? And I think it's 5 major points. And from there, map it to a framework. What do we do at each of these stages? How do we drive a really great customer experience? And then you combine that with a strong university brand. Bob's your uncle.
Yeah, wonderful. I can see that the chat, I'm getting flashbacks to our micro-credentials webinar last year, which had a chat that took hours to read through afterwards, and it's very busy and wonderful. But some of the questions that I know I've heard a lot around your case study are kind of can you share a bit more about behind the scenes, like the responses and the reactions at the university to an initiative like this? And, you know, that speaks to a bigger question of how does a traditional university adapt and evolve in this space?
With great cultural difficulty. To be quite genuine and honest about it, the Professional Academy, when we launched it, attracted a lot of what's this going to be now? Are we going to become a micro-credential mill, or are we going to deliver high quality here? And actually, 2 years in, I had a member of our university management team comment that we are held to higher standards in terms of how we do CPD than some of our traditional school peers, and rightly so, because we're operating in a new space. Biggest questions probably surround, okay, are you doing this to the level of quality that we would expect, and can you demonstrate that to us? Are you going to cannibalize our business? And I think we've been able to show that actually, no, this is a different market. The person taking this type of a course is different to the person who rocks up, who maybe wants to take a degree, or maybe wants to take a postgraduate course of study. And what they're looking for is short, sharp, applicable skills, something like data analytics, HR, project management. Get me going, get me a promotion, get me help me solve a problem that's existing in my job right now today. And I care less about the framework, and so that's the thing you guys care about a lot. I'm going to take you at your word that you're delivering high quality because you're a university, and we do. But I think that certainly, I think that as frameworks evolve over the next couple of years, it'll be helpful to get everybody comfortable with doing this as universities, but I wouldn't wait around for it, because the market is there today. We are going through an industrial sized revolution in terms of the technological revolution, and the changes in the workforce are massive, and there is a massive market there for universities. And as I say, it's not just about we're impacting on people's lives. We are delivering income into the university, and we're delivering strategic value. And some of my colleagues who might have been skeptical about this, when they start to see postgraduate students flowing into them, or they start to see CTOs of unicorns coming down to them, they start saying, okay, this is interesting. Let's work with this. Let's do more with this.
Aaron, can I jump in? There's just a couple of great questions in the channel that I wanted to flow through to you. One is from Beth. Thanks, Beth. What is your price point? What program topics are you offering to create such immediate demand? I mean, who doesn't want to go from 0 to 13,000 enrollments in micro-credentials? And what types of marketing tactics were most successful? So that's one. And another one, which I think is really great, is have you had to answer the career placement post-learner credential question, i.e., do you have to promise people jobs, I guess,
Sure.
in shorthand? Maybe you could share some of those.
I'll take the second one first. So in terms of career placements, no, we haven't, except in one case where we have some government-funded work, represents about 3% of our revenue, which is a labor force activation program. We actually outsource then to a third party who handles that piece. I'm a fundamental believer that workplace placements are slightly different unless you're a really specialized provider, unless you're doing like coding boot camps or something like that. So we haven't had to answer it hugely directly. Most of the people coming to us are kind of in scenario. They're not 18 years old looking for their first job. They are actually in the workforce, and so they don't necessarily need that. Price points, our courses, so the typical course, you're talking about 36 hours of let's say tuition. You're talking about, we're in euros, so 1,500 euros, so sub $2,000 in terms of tuition. And in terms of marketing and so on, I suppose we've started out direct to consumer. So we were advertising through Google and Facebook and all these different channels, bringing people to a website, getting them signed up as leads, using a good CRM, contacting them really, really quickly, and giving them a good consultation really quickly. These people are time poor. And then converting them. What we discovered was 1 in 3 of the people who come to us directly are sponsored by their employers. We started going back to those employers and saying, hey, you just sponsored Mary and Jack and Joe to take a course with us. Could we do some volume discounting? Is there more we could do? Let's understand how you drive your spend. That got us lots of people coming in through the door. Now it's about 1 in 2 of our students are sponsored by employers, and increasingly then they come to us and they say, hey, listen, we actually want to do a closed group. We've got all these people who need to upskill in data analytics. Could you do a closed group actually within working hours, going against our time thing, but it fits because the employer is leading it. And all of a sudden, like, I've got clients where we're signing 6-figure deals with them to do, for example, data analytics upskilling or project management upskilling throughout their workforce. And it just, you kind of start with the person, and if they have a good experience, tell another person, and you figure out where they're coming from, figure out where they work. Most of them will work somewhere, and then you kind of push on into that space. And it's amazing the amount of prior to this, I was in a private sector provider of education, and every time I sat down in front of a corporate, I spent the first 10 minutes convincing them that it was a real business. I walked into my first ever corporate pitch with UCD, and they were like, well, of course UCD can do this. And I was like, okay, that's the brand of the credibility is there, and of course we have to deliver on that promise. We have to hold ourselves to the highest standards. As I say to people on the first day working in UCD, the guy who founded UCD is a saint now, so that's the brand. But we uphold that. But then you have such a brand credibility walking around the place, and if you deliver on that promise, it's pretty easy to get people in the door. And as I say, they're looking for that short, sharp training with meaningful skills and meaningful assessment. So you give them a meaningful badge, but it's not half a year spent trying to study something.
Yeah. And the other part to the question was what types of topics, and I want to throw in another one. Yeah, what types of topics do you offer? And I want to throw in another one that I saw coming through the chat there, which was synchronous versus asynchronous. How do you deliver these? Just very quickly. And I know, Lucy, I know you've got other questions.
Sure. So in terms of topics, we currently have 40 courses. We have another 30 in the pipeline. So everything from project management, leadership management, there are 2 most popular products: data analytics, graphic design, digital marketing, HR, all the way down to supply chain management. We have stuff coming up on even more basic stuff like, kind of everyday data analytics. So let's get out of R and Python and coding, and let's get into how do you make data analytics sing through Excel, things like that. Very practical skills that people need in their day-to-day. Synchronous versus asynchronous. So about 28% of our market wants to learn purely on demand. They want to do it in their own time. About 20% want purely classroom, and everybody else wants something in the middle. They want some variation of, I want a bit of classroom and live online. The vast majority of our students are live online because when we launched in February 2020, something happened in March and we had to all abandon our classrooms very quickly, and we went online. So most of our growth came through live online, but we fully expect to be operating in classroom, have people live online, have people learning on demand, have people so people who are learning live online now get the benefit in some of our on-demand products of what we create there, the shelfware that we're effectively creating there. And it's super interesting as we go forward. I imagine we're constantly looking to innovate in terms of how we do the delivery. Interestingly, for those of you who are interested in geographic differences, so we're in Ireland. Ireland's a relatively small country. It costs me, so Dublin is the capital, it's in the east of the country. It costs me 20% more to acquire a direct customer in the south west of the country, down in like Limerick and Cork and all that type of area, than in Dublin, because those people would rather be studying with University College Cork, not University College Dublin. And so there's a really interesting space here for I think the geographical hometown advantage thing actually works in this space.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maria, for feeding those through. And those did actually mirror some of the questions we were going to cover, so that was really useful. I think there are more questions, but some of them, I recommend you actually go and look at the UCD Professional Academy site, because you can answer a lot of those questions about what's offered and how they're accredited and those kind of things through looking at that. But just one broader question to finish with before I hand back to you, Maria, that I know a lot of people have asked me when I've kind of mentioned this case study in terms of micro-credentials, which is that kind of question of why build this yourselves? There are lots of ways to create a micro-credential product, and there's partnering and variations on partnering and building and other approaches, or buying things in. Why build it yourselves?
Yeah, we were too dumb to know how hard it would be. No, it's genuinely, I think we were at a point in time where we were prepared to look at this and treat this a little bit separately to some of the other things we were doing as an organization, and say, okay, well, let's bring in the type of talent that we need to work on this. So we brought in people predominantly actually from the private sector, working alongside academic colleagues and so on, who brought a different perspective, because this is a sharper market. You've got to go out there and you've got to acquire your customers with slightly sharper elbows in this sort of a space. And let's try that. Let's build that. Let's see if we can build it and make them come. And we've been quite successful. Other institutions I speak to, they're just not in a position to make that type of a bet or that type of a risk, and it might make more sense for them to partner or to buy stuff in. And in fact, we partner. So we partner at a content level. When we do a data analytics course, we work with a great company called DataCamp, who have got a great platform for data analytics, and we work with them. And we've worked with a company, my old company, the Digital Marketing Institute, who have great digital marketing accreditation, so external accreditation. We've other courses that maybe people would do, like a PMI course for project management. Other courses we'd assess, they would do assignments or tests and so on. And so we do work with industry bodies. We work with other let's say courseware providers and so on. But we kind of looked at it and said, you know what, we probably have the capacity and the willingness in 2019 to make the bet, to roll the dice and to do this. And but it was bringing the right people in with the right kind of leadership backing to drive past some of the conservative objections that are there, quite right conservative objections, answer the questions that are there, and grow this. But it is, I think a lot of institutions need to get past themselves almost to get into this market, because actually what I've found, as I say, I was in the private sector selling courses to people, and I'm in the effectively the higher education space now doing it, and I would tell you it's like selling on easy mode to an extent, and it is a space where universities, yes, there's a lot to worry about how micro and alternative credential frameworks work and so on, but actually there's a market there for us, and we can elevate that market, genuinely elevate it by delivering super high quality to people, and it genuinely has an impact on their lives. I carry on case studies from students and testimonials on LinkedIn from students who, some people this is just a thing that helps them in their career. Some people this helps change their lives and change the direction of what they're doing, and it's so cool to be able to do that and offer that. I think as a university, that speaks to our core mission ultimately.
Yeah. can I just pop in there? There's some really great chat going on there.
Mhm.
I just wanted to confirm with you, Aaron, that you threw out a couple of stats in terms of preferences for doing it in their own time versus live and synchronous, and everybody else who just wanted a bit of both. Can you just confirm those, not percentages exactly, but just the when
sure.
when you say live synchronous, do you mean online, all online, or is there any physical live synchronous?
Yeah, so physical live, 20%. Purely on demand online, 28%, and then it's mix and match in the middle. I would say that there's kind of again, you go and you speak to OPMs and so on, there's a real preference for, let's build it, put it out there, put people on the courses, and away they go. We find that a huge amount of the value that our students get, even when they're doing on-demand type courses, is when they get to come to tutorials and breakout sessions, and a lot of value from intermingling with other learners who tend to be in, like, we put senior people and less senior people in a room for breakouts, and they're really bouncing off one another and learning from one another and so on. That's a fantastic thing to see. There is a market of people who just want to shut themselves off, head down, study this course, get through. I think sometimes in this space and in the edtech space, we think, sure, everybody will push them into this really scalable on-demand model. That's not necessarily the model that the vast majority of people want, but we're making money doing this. I mean, that's the really interesting thing, is that we're making pretty significant profits, where the vast majority of our first students who came through were sitting down in front of a lecturer who's been paid quite a bit of money to sit there and deliver to them. And now over time, we're rolling out on-demand programs, but our synchronous and asynchronous content and learning is coming together, and we're intermingling those. So it's not really a fairly straightforward answer. I don't think there's a perfect customer who just wants a pure play on-demand type offering.
Yeah. I think there's actually, I mean, all the higher ed people, all the academics and higher ed people in the room, there's nothing new about, interacting with content is one thing, interacting with people through learning is another, and interacting with the expert is a third type of, engagement. And so most people want all of the above rather than just one way of doing things. But, thanks for answering those questions, Aaron, and great insights into how you've gone from A to B, A to Z, really.
Thank you.
There is a next layer of question detail coming through, but we are going to have to
we could be here for hours.
Maria. We really could be here for hours, and we'll know for next time to schedule a 3-hour session with you, Aaron, for us to work through all this detail. But Aaron, I know you have said you're very happy for people to contact you and to talk through with people. You're very keen to actually, lift everybody through these processes and be able to work together and grow together. So please do consider that an open invitation. Maria, let me hand over to you to decide how quickly you want to work through scenarios.
Yes, we've got a few minutes left, but I want to relatively quickly jump through where micro-credentials might head. And this is going to be a quick spin. Last year, we developed, through a whole bunch of research, different sort of scenarios that might inform how micro-credentials moves forward. And really, it's on two axes, as you can see here. Will post-secondary credentials be more government-led or more market-led, be more bundled, or be more unbundled? Of course, scenarios, there's not going to be one solution. All these will be operating in the market, but as it relates to micro-credentials particularly, where do you see things happening? So I'm going to ask for a vote in a minute, so just watch out for these. Firstly, let's say the greater whole. Scenario number one, which is really disaggregated components of degrees and so on, is not accepted by the world, and a bundled government-funded post-secondary education market dominates. That's great. That's what greater whole is. Second is micro qualifications. So in this scenario, micro credentials, it's unbundled, but government led, or there's lots of government funding and so on. So micro credentials become the primary form, or of dominant form of post-secondary education. Degree at its extreme, degree enrollments collapse. Will it go more towards that? And governments have mandated and funded micro credentials for upskilling and workforce post-secondary. That's scenario number two. Scenario number three, we're on the market-led and bundled, which is really professions, and there's a whole bunch of discussion in the channel about professional accreditation, professional training, and so on. So industry associations, professional bodies, global mega brands, they dominate. It's market-led rather than government-led, and it's bundled. And the fourth scenario is a real marketplace, which is unbundled and market-led. In this scenario, micro-credentials have matured to a point where it's just a dominant sort of set of formats are established, they're understood, they're accepted, it's a marketplace, and probably blockchain is right in there and helping to make sure everyone understands and can credentials are portable and all that sort of thing. So greater whole, let me jump through to greater whole, micro credentials, micro qualifications, professions rule, or marketplace. So which post-secondary credential scenario of those is most likely? Where would you place your bets, knowing of course that scenarios there'll be more than one operating? If you'd like to submit your vote, we'll have a quick look at what that might be. Let me just jump back to the 4. There you go. So greater whole, government-led, bundled, or bundled and market-led, or unbundled and government micro-credentials, and unbundled and market-led, which is marketplace. So at the moment, 50% are saying, look, it's going to be a marketplace, which is unbundled and market-led. Professions rule is a third. And, that's really super interesting. And micro quals, which is the top right-hand, the green one, which is governments endorsing and paying for, essentially unbundled, is really quite small at 11%, and greater whole less so. And so, Lucy, how does that compare with our results from last year?
Really interesting. So marketplace was top last year as well, and it's top this year as well, but professions has come up this year. So professions is a third here. Last year it was only about a fifth of responses, so it's more of a focus on that.
Yeah, great. All right. So we have some as I said, all these scenarios will probably be in place, but it's really interesting to see where people are seeing the future heading. Let me just flick through these again and jump through, Lucy, to jump in with next steps. Yeah,
wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm not going to linger on these. We will send you an email with lots of resources and things that you can look at more deeply in this. We're always happy to talk about the framework. We do come back to our frameworks and rework them with lots of input. So please do keep sharing how you're using them. We've heard such good things about where you're using them in workshops to really spark people's thinking, and you're splitting them up. And somebody asked me if I can put one on a Miro board the other day. So please use this as a catalyst for discussion. It's not set in stone. It's absolutely meant to make people argue and tear their hair out and get more focused on what capabilities you want to be talking about here. So there's the framework. Case studies, I believe we've shared a link to the case studies as well. We are always happy to hear, could you be on this webinar next year, whether it's micro-credentials or something else? Please let us know and we can talk through that with you. Global Higher Education Network, we would love to have you participate in this. There's good reasons to be in that, because not just this, we're running summits later this year. Where you'll find us next week, Maria is already in the US, San Diego, 4th to 6th of April, early next week. So please come and find us if you're at that huge conference. And then also Patrick will be in Boston with a Times Higher Ed conference looking at digital capabilities in higher education again there. And then, yes, we are super excited to be coming to a city, hopefully somewhere near you in the last few months of this year. So we encourage you to come and look at what's on and come join us face to face. We really can't wait to see you face to face. It's going to be wonderful. Any last words from you, Aaron or Maria?
We could go on all evening.
We really could.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And I have to say, this is not a plug, but genuinely, HolonIQ and the research that you guys produce has been a real guide for us in terms of what we've been doing all along here. So thank you very much. It's nice to be able to give back a little bit of one of these.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks.
Great. And the session will be recorded, and you'll get a recording as soon as we close up today, which is in a few minutes. You'll get a recording into your email. And of course, go to our website. There's lots of research there on micro-credentials and lots of other higher education goodies, so to speak. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lucy.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Maria.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.
See you.